Well, good morning, table family. We all have our rhythms, right? I think it's funny that Pastor Kim answered 100 emails before she started her day. We're in a series called Rhythms, and I don't know if you've noticed, but we keep a pretty full schedule. I don't know about you, but my schedule seems to not be getting less, but be getting more, right? In fact, have you ever noticed when you ask somebody how they're doing? I actually did a little experiment on a few people this morning. You didn't know it, but I asked a few people how they were doing. I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say this one word: busy, right? We all do it. When people ask me how I'm doing, oh, I'm pretty busy, and I start telling them what I've been doing, But I decided to do some research after I took a statistical class, research methods class, working on my doctorate. I don't like just opinions. I like the facts, right? So I decided to do just a little bit of research just to see how busy all of us really are. So Forbes magazine published an article, actually by the World Health Organization, says Americans worked 106 hours more a year than Japanese workers, 248 hours more than British workers, 423 hours more than German workers, right? And here's what they reported. Overwork is the single most significant cause of disease. Ouch. Those working more than 55 hours, watch out, because you have a 35% higher risk of stroke, 17 higher risk of heart disease compared to those who work under 40 hours a week. So when your boss wants you to work more than 40 hours, you've got some stats, to back that up, why you don't want to work more than 40 hours a week, right? Overwork actually has a ripple effect, including poor sleep, bad exercise, and they even said excessive drinking and smoking. The more you work, the more unhealthy you are, right? The U.S. remains the only industrialized country in the entire world that doesn't mandate an annual time off. Did you know that? I didn't know that. Although I do have a friend from Sweden, and she takes a month off every summer. Like, that's what they do. They have a word for it. And they take this extended time off, and it's supported by the government. I'm like, honey, let's retire in Sweden. That sounds like really good to me right now. But here's the part of the article that really caught my attention. They said there's 2 primary reasons that most of us are overworking. Number one, we won't be too surprised. We believe culturally that money can buy happiness. So more money means we're supposed to be happier, right? And if you work more, you get more money. So that's one reason why people overwork. And the next one I thought was interesting. We have a perception, there's a perception in America at least, that we don't work as hard as other nations, and we kind of feel like we need to keep up and work a little bit harder. When in fact, U.S. only trails a handful of countries in our productivity per worker per country, which I thought was interesting. But regardless of your work ethic, how many hours a week you work, I think we can all agree that we're at least overstimulated, right? We are so distracted by social media, Netflix, all of the demands we have in our phones. Have you ever noticed that sometimes you think you hear your phone going off and it's not? There's a name for that too. And we all, we're so distracted, we're even distracted when nothing's distracting us. It's quite distracting. But if we believe God's word is truth, and if we believe God's word is relevant for our lives today, how did the rhythms of Jesus give us answers for the problems that we're facing today? See, Jesus was raised in a Jewish home. And in Jewish homes, they followed the 10 Commandments. How many have ever heard of the 10 Commandments, right? You've heard of those, right? I don't know about you, but growing up, I always thought the 10 Commandments were just the list of 10 things not to do. Right? Hey, and there's some truth to that. It's probably a good idea not to kill. It's probably a good idea not to steal. It's probably a good idea not to lie. But there are some hidden blessings in the 10 Commandments. I want to read one of them for you, and it's one that we don't really talk about much. In Exodus 20, it says, remember, this is one of the 10, okay? Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week to do your ordinary work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one, say no one, No one in your household may do any work. I like this. I kind of like this. This includes your sons, your daughters, your male, your female servants, your livestock, any foreigners among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything in them, but on the seventh day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath and set it apart as holy. Think about this. Of all the world religions, our God is the one who commands us to rest and take a break and actually enjoy life. Did you know that was hidden in the 10 Commandments? That's something that I don't remember getting taught growing up. We've been talking about the rhythms of Jesus. He spent time in the rhythm of relationship with God, right, in prayer. He spent time in the rhythm of relationship and community, that cadence of community that we talked about. But he also practiced the rhythm of rest on the Sabbath. I don't know about you, but I hit a season of my life. I was in my 30s at the time, and I was raising a family. I had a full-time job, and I was going back to school to work on my master's at the time. And I remember hitting a place in my life where I was just frustrated and exhausted. Anybody been there? You just hit a place where you're just like, I am so tired, and I'm tired of being tired. And I remember taking a class on the theology of Sabbath and reading a little tiny book called The Sabbath, explaining why the Sabbath wasn't just something for Jesus back then, but it's something for us today. Now, here's the reality. The Sabbath is kind of a foreign concept to us, right? Even on the weekends, right? We might get a day off, but I don't know about you, but if I'm not careful, my whole weekend can be filled with something to do. Every weekend I can be busy, right? Doing more things. So even though the Sabbath is a foreign concept, it was very familiar to Jesus. It was very familiar to the people of his day to take a day off and not do any work and enjoy life. So we're going to talk about the rhythm of rest this morning. From the beginning of time, God mandated that we should work. How many know work is a good thing, right? In fact, in Genesis, it says, God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over everything, every living creature that moves on the ground. In other words, I created this world, and you get to work in it. You have some stewardship and responsibility. Work is good because God created work, right? Even Paul said in the New Testament, he says, those unwilling to work will not get to eat. How many of you ever told your kids, hey, if you don't clean up your room, you don't get dinner. You don't get to go out to ice cream, whatever. So let's look at the Old Testament to find a practical example about how God wants us to live in the rhythms of rest. How many remember God's people, the Israelites? They had been in slavery for 400 years, and then God came in, sent a man named Moses. He says, I'm going to rescue my people. He brings his people out of slavery from Egypt, and now they are wandering in the wilderness, and this is where they find them. In Exodus 16. It says, then the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the Israelites' complaints. They were hungry. How many complain when you're hungry? Yeah, I complain when I'm hungry, right? You don't want to be around me when I'm hangry because you're going to know it, right? I'm going to be like, okay, I need some food. We need to do something about this. Now tell them, in the evening you will have meat to eat, and in the morning you will have all the bread you want. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. Until this point, they had worked in slavery, but now God was teaching them the rhythm of rest. So God supplies food for them. Because here's what we learn. The rhythms of rest require us to trust in God's provision. We can't rest unless we trust that God is our provider. Have you ever wondered how much is enough? How much money in the bank account is enough? How much square footage in my house would be enough? How much chocolate would be enough, right? Never enough, never enough. But when Jesus taught us how to pray in the Lord's Prayer, do you remember how he taught us to pray for provision? He said, Lord, give us our daily bread. I don't know about you, but I'm always worried and thinking about having enough for tomorrow or next week or next year or when the kids are in college, or now I'm thinking weddings hopefully will be coming up in the next couple years, maybe, hopefully, possibly, right? Got to prepare for that. We're always concerned about tomorrow, but at the heart of practicing the rhythm of rest, God says, do you trust me? That I'm your provider. Trust is the prerequisite for rest. Our health, our ability to earn wealth comes from God. And when we acknowledge that God is the ultimate source of everything that we possess, we can release the responsibility to Him and say, God, it's in your hands. I love what Paul says in Philippians. He says, and my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of the glory of Christ Jesus. Notice how Paul says God will supply all your needs. He doesn't say it's my job to supply all my needs. He says God's job is to supply all my needs. Only when I trust can I really enter into the rest of God. I hope you can get that deep in your spirit today, that God is your provider. So God promises to provide for His people. He sends manna, He sends meat, quail. But here's a real practical instruction that He gives them next. Check this out. So Exodus, He's telling them, look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you each day. The people can go and pick up as much food as they need for that day. There's the daily bread. I will test them in this to see whether or not they follow my instructions. Now, here it comes. Catch this. On the sixth day, somebody say the sixth day, they will gather food, and when they prepare it, there will be twice as much as usual. Twice as much as usual. Why was God telling them this? He was telling them, hey, I don't want you out there working on the seventh day. I don't want you out here working 7 days a week on the grind. So I want you to prepare. Rhythms of rest require preparation and require protection. Have you ever noticed that only you can control your calendar? I was complaining to God one day. Anybody else complain to God once in a while? And I was like, God, I'm just so busy. And God was like, well, I didn't make your calendar. I didn't set those meetings. I didn't put those appointments on. Wait, what do you look at? Why are you blaming me? You know, we blame God for everything, don't we? But only you can protect your time and your calendar. And protecting our day off on Sabbath means saying no, right? If we're going to say yes to the Sabbath, we're going to have to say no to some other things. We're going to have to disappoint some other people, right? And so planning for Sabbath has to be intentional. I have to do my shopping on other days of the week. I have to do my chores on the other days of the week. I have to pay my bills on the other days of the week so I can protect that one day that I say, God, I'm going to enjoy my life and I'm going to rest on the Sabbath. Remember that old classic song by the Rolling Stones? I can't get no satisfaction. Anybody remember that? I can't get no. You all know it. You all heathens, right? I can't get no satisfaction. Guess what? If we work 7 days a week, we're all going to be singing that song because there is nothing more dissatisfying than all work and no play. There's nothing more dissatisfying about just working all of the time and never getting a break, never enjoying the life that God has given us. If we look back to creation, God modeled the very first Sabbath, right? By the seventh day, God had finished the work. Say finished. Sometimes we just need to say, you know what? What is done is done. Enough is enough. It's good enough, and I'm finished. I'm taking a day off. Because how many know sometimes it feels like there's always something to do? There's always something undone. And yet it says by the seventh day, God had finished the work He had been doing. So on the seventh day, He rested from all of His work. Then God blessed the seventh day, made it holy because He rested from His work of creating all that He had done. Let me ask you a question. Why do you think God rested? You ever stop and ask yourself that? Was He tired? Was He worn out? Was He exhausted from creating all of those things? Psalm says God never sleeps or never slumbers. So was God tired? I'm going to propose that God rested with the purpose to enjoy what He created. He wasn't tired. He wasn't exhausted. He wanted to enjoy it. A few years ago, Greg and I did a backyard project. We actually put together this shed. And when we were done, we just poured some iced tea. And we just wanted to sit and look at it and enjoy it. Like, look at our hard work. We did it, and it's not falling over. It's a miracle. And we don't need marriage counseling. That was another thing. We did it together, and we live to tell the story. What good is it for you to have a house if you never enjoy it? What good is it to have a family if you never stop and enjoy them? What good is it to have a great job if you don't stop and enjoy the things that it provides? The rhythm of rest helps us experience the satisfaction of life. The author of the book of Ecclesiastes makes this keen observation. They say this, "Even so, I have noticed one thing, at least, that is good. It is good for people to eat, drink, and enjoy their work under the sun during the short life God has given them and to accept their lot in life." God wants us to enjoy our lives. But can I be honest? Some of us, depending on your personality type, there are some people that I know that just seem like every day is a Sabbath. And they need just a little bit of a fire to get up and do something. Anybody? No pointing fingers. No pointing fingers. But then there are others that to take a day off is difficult. On my day off, I'm thinking of all the things that I didn't get done the previous week and all the things that I have to do the next week, right? And God is saying, you know what? You need to take this day off and unplug from the guilt, get off the rat race and the wheel of life that just keeps you going. And here's something that has been helpful to me that I hope is helpful to you, if that's you. Ask yourself this, on your Sabbath, on that day that you take, and it's not just a day off. It's a day that we're honoring, right? It's a day that we're remembering God's goodness. It's not just a day to sit around brainlessly watching Netflix all day. Although Netflix might be how you unplug. But here's a question to ask yourself. What is life giving to me? All of us have different things that we enjoy, right? You might want to hike. You might want to nap. You might want to go out, hang out with friends. You might want to cook. You might, like me, I like to bake on my day off. I just like sweet stuff, and there's something just relaxing about being in the kitchen. And as long as it has sugar in the recipe, I'm good. Brownies, cookies, cupcakes, pies. I'm a sucker for pastries. Anything flaky and crusty. But ask yourself, what's life giving to you? And then do this. Give yourself permission to listen to your body and give your body what it needs that day. Sometimes I need to just stay in my pajamas and take a nap and just do nothing. And sometimes I need to get out of the house and go hike, right? Listen to your body. Give yourself permission to unplug and enjoy the Sabbath and enjoy what God has given us. The rhythms of rest require us to trust in God's provision. We can't rest until we trust that God is our provider. Rhythms of rest require some preparation and protection. You're going to have to say no. Right now, Greg and I, our day off is on Saturdays. If you haven't noticed, I work on Sundays, right? And so I can't take Sundays off, right? So we take Saturdays off. And there's just times that people ask me to do things, and I'm like, I'm glad it's your birthday. I love you. I'm so sorry I can't make it. Unless that day it felt life-giving to go to that birthday party, right? It just depends on what's life-giving to me that day. And rhythms of rest help us experience satisfaction. I wanted to bring up a panel at the end of our message, if you could start coming, because I think it's good to recognize how we can actually put some of these things into practice. How many know sometimes we talk about things in church and they sound like a really good idea, and then on Monday morning, life slaps you in the face, and you're like, okay, I know we talked about something really good at church, but how do I actually live this? So I thought I'd bring up a diverse group of people in different generations and in different seasons of life. We got a newlywed here, Pastor Arianna,
That's right.
newlywed. Dr. David Hymes, you're on the other side of things. You're on the empty nester stage, right? Kids are gone. You got grandkids now. How many grandkids?
5.4.
One's on the way. 5.4. We got one on the way. And Lauren.
You want me to say what?
Yeah, how many kids do you have?
Oh, I have 2 kids.
2 kids. And none on the way, right?
No way. No point.
Nothing's
Anything.
on the way. See, you're like me. I got 2 and I'm through. That was my rule. So I just want to hear from this season. How do you plan your Sabbath? Anybody can go first. How do you plan your Sabbath?
Well, I'll be honest. This was a very timely sermon, and interesting that I was up here because this was probably, I think, the not worst, but busiest week of probably my career. I don't know. I worked probably over 80 hours this week, and lots of late nights. I'm a lawyer, and so there's just kind of the combination of things that made me busy. And so I planned for my answer to this on Monday, and I got to keep revisiting it through the week of what I was going to do today, which is my Sabbath, which is Sunday. And so my plan for Sabbath generally is to try not to do other things. I'm one of those people who, my family can tell you, I can just always find space to put more stuff into it. And so they tell you in Hebrews, make every effort to rest, right? And so I, kind of try to go in without a plan, maybe things that are life-giving, right? Yeah. And so that for us looks like we do church on Sundays, and then we go home, and a lot of Sundays we do family movie night, or maybe we go see family, but we're not making plans, and I'm not working, right? So those 80 hours have to be in the Monday through Saturday.
Yeah, that's good.
I was also convicted, while we were, doing this message, I was like, man, I also have to find time to rest. So planning my Sabbath looks like a lot of times doing chores before Sabbath. I'm a recent grad from college, so I was not used to all the different house chores that there were to do. So I was like, man, it's not just about the work of my job, but it's also about the housework and things that just don't give me life and feel like work that I want to not do on Sabbath and instead do ahead of time, like the preparation you were talking about. And since I have a spouse now, I'm newlywed, Joseph, we're very different, and a lot of times I find rest and going out and talking with people and being very social, or going outside, and he finds rest more being at home and resting and taking it slow. So another part of our prep for Sabbath, I suppose, is just to talk to each other and talk about where we're both at, if we want to Sabbath together, if we're going to Sabbath apart, and what our Sabbath is going to look like for the week.
That's good. What about you, Dr. Hymes?
For me, what I focus on is the term that we have where it says to make it holy.
Yes.
Because that's constantly found both in Exodus, Deuteronomy, and also in Genesis. And to make it holy means basically to separate to God and away from the common.
That's good.
That's good.
So the idea here is that the Sabbath is a day that you focus your attention toward God.
That's good.
So the plan is, hey, where can I do that best?
Yes.
Number one thing is actually church.
Right.
And that church life is something that has been routinized. So when I think Sunday, I think church. I was in the UK very recently this last summer, working on a sabbatical, writing a book on the book of Numbers. And so 6 days I'm in the library.
Yes.
It's a routine. But on the 7th day, I've already made my plans to, where I can find a church, because I'm not living there. And also, since it's out of the common, the ordinary, in the UK, they always have Sunday roasts.
Ooh.
Sunday roast.
So
that's a good routine.
Oh, yeah. Well, because I like to eat.
Sign me up.
So the routinizing in terms of focusing on God by attending church.
That's really powerful. I love the setting apart and making it holy. It's not just a day off to do whatever we want. It's to reconnect with God, recharge, refresh. One of the hardest things for me is protecting that day off, right? Because we have so many demands. We want to serve people. We want to help people. How do you protect the Sabbath? What does that look like?
Yeah, obviously not making plans, but what I've learned about myself while I've practiced Sabbath for the past 4 years is a lot of times when you work 6 days a week, or you just have a lot going on, whether you have kids or whatever season you're in, a lot of times your day off, your thoughts kind of creep into it. Thoughts about work, thoughts about your to-do list, just unresolved things that are going on at work or in relationships. And a lot of times when there's that silence of Sabbath, a lot of that can creep into the silence. So what I learned recently about Sabbath, actually from our kids pastor, Pastor Sierra, she's teaching the kids very well because I learned something too, is that you don't just have to protect your Sabbath physically and physically rest, but also mentally and spiritually protect your Sabbath. So with my mind, I'm like, when I think about work, instead of dwelling on it, I'm going to stop thinking about that, like I'm going to entrust God with the finishing of my work, and I'm going to protect my mind and my thoughts as well as my plans and schedule.
That's good.
So I do two things that I think that are very practical to protect my Sabbath. So one is I just kind of have taken stock. I had the newlywed stage. We'll talk about that, I think, in a minute, and what that season looked like. And I realized at that point there's a lot of work to do at home, and I right now have a lot of work to do at work. So I have thought about, like 2 years ago, Keith and I, my husband and I, sat down like, where can we get help, right? Because there are too many hours worth of work to get done and to have a Sabbath. So we have shifted that work where we can, and we're just in a season of life where we've made different priorities, and that's a priority for us, is to make sure that we protect a day, which means that I'm not doing Costco, so I have somebody else do Costco. And that might look like hiring somebody to do Costco, or that might be Instacart on Saturday, right? It can take lots of different forms. So that's one practical thing, is I've shifted work where I can. And then the other practical thing, and actually I got it from my mom, and I don't think she was doing it as a Sabbath, but I think it is a Sabbath thing, is family day is Sunday. So Sunday, my mom, when I was in high school, and I hated it at the time, made me stay home. And it was the one day I couldn't go out and do all the things that I wanted to do, because this personality was there in high school too, and I had to be home. And friends could come over, but I had to be home. And so now Keith and I are doing that with our family, which is Sunday is home day, and it protects it, because you just know, kind of like, on Sunday you go to church, I know on Sunday that I'm home with my family, and it helps protect it.
I love
good.
that.
Yeah, for me, I think the focus is mindset. So, if you look at the Sabbath in Exodus, it says, based on, the whole idea is because God created it, right? So that means that part of the fabric of creation is that we observe the Sabbath.
Yes.
On the other hand, in Deuteronomy, interesting enough, in the Ten Commandments, it says that you observe the Sabbath specifically because that's a remembrance that God has saved you out of slavery.
Yes.
So if you have those two components, and the mindset is there, that's saying, the Sabbath is because of God's created it within the structure of the universe, and on top of that, it has something dynamically to do with my deep relationship with God, that I am saved.
Yeah.
So how I guard it is mindset.
That's good.
love
That's
that.
really powerful. I want to close with one last question. Life happens in seasons, and so my Sabbath looked different when I was single, right? My Sabbath looked different when I had little babies at home. My Sabbath looks different, now that I have adult kids. How do you shift your Sabbath? Because I know Greg and I, we used to Sabbath on Mondays together. Well, now Greg works Monday through Friday, and my schedule has changed, so we've had to shift things. How does that look in your lives?
When we were first married, I wasn't, I think, if I think back, really wasn't practicing a Sabbath. And so what it looked like at that time was I married somebody who would look at our calendar and say, where is the rest, right?
Yes, that's
I
good.
need rest. And he would say, you need rest, but I'm taking rest, whether you think you need rest or not.
Right.
And so I think, it's just shifted. We used to have Saturday night church here, right? And so just kind of thinking about what your weekend looks like, and where are you going to find the rest, and pairing yourself with somebody who's going to keep
That's
you
good.
accountable to finding the rest.
That's really good.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I was a college student who had a job and an internship, so it was very crazy, plus volunteering at church, so it was very crazy and hard to find a Sabbath, but I was just like, no homework during my college days, but then it shifted a lot when I graduated and got married, and now I'm like, it's not just about what I feel like doing or how I'm going to connect with God, but it's also like my spouse is in the same house with me. We like
right.
often share a car, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, how are we both going to Sabbath together? And that
Right.
was one of the big questions. And I'm like, I never considered, actually, one of the things most surprising about marriage was, man, how are we going to rest together? And that was one of the big questions. So I think it was just really interesting to learn deeply about myself, what gives me rest in different seasons. Like, if I'm working from home a lot one week, I'm not going to want to be at home because I'm going to be anxious. Or if I'm running around all week, I'm going to want to be home. But also, like, what does my spouse, what brings him rest, you know? And what helps us rest together? Because there are some Sabbaths where I'm like, man, I haven't seen you all week, bro. Like, we have to rest together, you know? But there are some times when we just need very different things and we rest apart. So I think just having another person in the picture for me as a newlywed was just a whole new thing about Sabbath, but it also helped me. It's not like it stunted my Sabbath, but he was just part of my Sabbath, just like he was part of my life, you know, being
flexible.
newly married.
Had to be flexible
being
with the
flexible,
Sabbath.
compromise, and
That's really
listening
good.
and all that. Yeah.
What about you? We'll give the last word to our theological resident.
As I get older, I realize that you have to always do the long game.
That's good.
And that's where Jesus in the Gospel of Mark chapter 2, he's clear that, you know, human beings weren't made to obsessively observe the Sabbath.
Right.
True.
I mean, you know, the Sabbath was supposed to be something that was to help us
Life-giving.
out.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's the center of my mind, because when I was growing up, there was some real legalistic understandings about the Sabbath.
Right.
You couldn't play sports on the Sabbath if you were a Christian.
Right.
Can you imagine that today?
Right.
But I think the issue is, no, are humans created for the Sabbath, or is Sabbath created for humans?
That's right.
And for me, I think that's the crux as I get older, to constantly remember it's the long game.
Yeah, that's so good. Can we thank our panelists this morning? Give them a hand.